truly big world news. The United States and Iran have a tentative agreement to end this long-running, now several months long-running war. The details are not all sketched out, but we are seeing everyone take this seriously, including other countries around the world, the global markets, particularly energy supplies. So this is one of those developments that comes with Donald Trump's credibility problems, and we'll touch on that, but also very clear signs that a lot of people believe what they're being told, that we are on the precipice of ending a war that so many Americans opposed from the start. Now, like I said, it's been 4 months or so. There was, of course, fighting. There was loss of life. There was the energy crisis. This could be the major step towards ending the conflict. And as a reminder, 13 Americans have died, thousands of Iranians have died, and global markets and energy supplies and your gas prices have all been upended with Donald Trump's unilateral war of choice. In other words, he just started this war. He didn't run it by Congress or the public, and now he's trying to get it basically finished with or without the goals that he and his allies and aides had talked about in the beginning. And the presidents in France today, U.S. officials say he and J.D. Vance have essentially signed by proxy, digitally signed a framework ahead of what will be the actual formal signing of a deal on Friday. The reports are that this would reopen that key Strait of Hormuz, which, remember, was open before Trump started the war, but that's crucial to oil prices. And we are here in reality where everyone wanted to eventually find a way to get that reopened. The ceasefire that has been tenuous will be extended for 60 days, and then there will be a framework for Iran to discuss its nuclear program. If that sounds familiar, Iran's been discussing it with United States diplomats, proxies, cutouts, middle people for many years. So again, we're kind of back to where we were in some sense, although this could be good news if the deal holds. It's also unclear whether Iran will continue to try to use this conflict and its disruptions to exert additional control over the strait more than it had in the past. We don't know what assurances the U.S. has about those coming talks and whether they think it would actually constrain Iran's nuclear stockpile. But Trump is winding down this war, and he is doing so, as the Times summarized it, with his goals unmet. Trump gave a range of rationales when he started this war. There were big demands. There was big talk about changing the regime, about using force to somehow have an uprising, perhaps, or change the structure of the government there. But he failed to achieve anything like the unconditional surrender that he promised. There is no regime change. There is actually a younger hardline regime in place. And although there was, of course, progress from the U.S. and allies' perspective at degrading aspects of Iran's military, they have not destroyed its capabilities. They have also not destroyed or eliminated Iran's nuclear stockpile and potential. So what you have here is a war that has been mostly waged with a lot of U.S. regret. Regret on the energy side from anyone living in America who says, we don't want to pay for this. Why is our gas more expensive? Regret among military experts who said, well, if you actually knew everything that we know now, would you have even started this war? Because a young, hardline, strengthened set of leaders might be even worse than the situation they had. And for anyone who thought there might have been a more incremental path to a democracy movement in Iran, well, now they've reset the table. The U.S. leaves. Don't expect that movement to be very fortified. Republican Lindsey Graham says he's concerned about this deal. Over on Fox, they're saying this.
This 60-day period, sir, if we reach it, this is precarious. It's tough stuff because Iran's history is to get to that table and just drag this thing out month after month and eventually year after year. I just like, what do you think about us getting suckered back into a long, stalemated negotiation?
What you're hearing there is a concern based on the actual history, a kind of regretful hawk's view of what could happen next, because most people are busy living their lives, and the way Donald Trump is governing America, people have got a lot of different problems to deal with, including the high prices. But if you have studied the Iran history, there is a reason that this is a country that is so opposed, from UAE and Saudis to Israel to the United States to Western Europe. Iran has bedeviled the region. it has never been straightforward, honest, or easy to deal with. And so while it is true, on the one hand, that nobody has high hopes for a long, protracted negotiation process that will magically result in Iran backing off all of its very well-established military goals, on the other hand, remember where the status quo was. We knew all this. The military briefs all this. The CIA tells the president all this. And previous presidents have looked at the situation and said, it's bad, but adding a war won't help. It's tough, but you have to just engage them and go forward. Indeed, a president who dealt with this, Barack Obama, because he's speaking out in interviews about his library, ended up also discussing the issues of trying to get improvement out of this type of regime.
It is doubtful that any agreement that arises is going to be significantly different or a significant improvement from the deal that we had in the first place and had worked for a long stretch of time before the United States pulled out of it.
That deal had worked. Now, what does working mean when you're dealing with this kind of country, a country that's a state sponsor of terror, that has waged war on its neighbors for years, that oppresses and kills its own people? Worked doesn't mean it's great or you're happy with this regime. But worked had meant that they were constrained and contained. Those are principles of foreign policy that are distinct from shooting first and then finding things get even worse. And then the U.S., under Trump, being brought back to the negotiating table to get what? The strait reopened like it was before the war was started? Don't mishear me. I'm telling you the news tonight is incremental progress because we are further away from escalation and a longer war. A lot of people say that's pretty much obviously a good thing. And the price of oil is receding, is sliding. So those are things that could affect you and your pocketbook here in America, and they are welcomed, and the markets are cheering them and welcoming them. The Dow hitting all-time highs on this news today. That's the good part. But did we have to get here this way under this president? Well, that's the foreign policy question. And for that, we bring in David Rothkopf, Clinton administration official, foreign policy expert, host of Deep State Radio podcast, also a member of the prestigious Council on Foreign Relations, and retired four-star Army General Barry McCaffrey, an MS Now military analyst who has been with us, guided us through so much coverage. General, we talked about this from day one of this conflict. I tried to walk through with all fairness why a lot of folks think this sounds like a good step rather than more war, and yet there's so much criticism about just getting back to maybe status quo. Could you give us your breakdown tonight?
Well, first of all, Ari, that was a terrific opening assessment of where we are. Let me add the perspective of Senator Jack Reed. I've had a lot of respect for him over the years with his decades of foreign policy and national security experience. His characterization is, we got a deal to make a deal. So in the coming 60 days, we may or may not see any significance to the continued dialogue. The good news, as you say, is stopping fighting is the right thing to do. So the ceasefire is positive and may well allow us to pull back major U.S. naval forces and air power from the Mideast, where they've been deployed for a long time. It's also true the straits will probably open, although they may be impaired in free transit of commercial shipping by the Iranians. They may try and continue to charge tolls. And finally, I don't think it to be underestimated that there has been devastating damage to Iranian conventional military capabilities. And that's a good thing. Vile regime. I would personally assess, though, that the only cause worth fighting for was the Iranian nuclear program. And that, I do not believe, will be significantly constrained in the long run by this war. It's more likely that they'll take those 10 tons of highly enriched HEU and turn them into a dozen nuclear weapons in 5 years.
And so I'll ask you, and then I'll bring in David. But General, on that point, is it fair to say then that it might only be a face-saving technique for the Trump administration to say, well, we'll get this going now, we'll talk about that later, and you seem to be in agreement with what other critics have said, which is, well, later means never to them?
Well, I think it's been a strategic disaster for the United States. I mean, we've had tactical incredible power over the Iranians. We lost 2 aircraft in 21,000 sorties against Iran. But we didn't change the strategic situation for the better. I think we're more vulnerable. We've lost a lot of credibility. Our allies in the Persian Gulf and Europe hate us for what we got them into. So I think this has been largely a strategic disaster for U.S. foreign and defense policy.
David, your views?
Well, exactly the same. And it's hard not to come to those conclusions. We entered into this thing ostensibly to produce the changes that you listed at the outset. We didn't produce those changes. And in fact, here we are suing for peace. The president wants to turn the page. And so he's celebrating an agreement that will not actually get us back to the status quo and will not actually produce the results that he wants to achieve. You know, for the average American who's saying, well, my gas prices will go down because of this, not so fast. First of all, we have 60 days of negotiation. That's likely to be extended. There could be starts and stops in the Persian Gulf with regard to that. But the impact of opening up the Strait of Hormuz now on gas prices will take months and months to be felt. Fertilizer ships and things like that will come after the oil ships. So the impact on food prices will take even longer to be felt. The Iranians right now are in a better position with regard to gaining a nuclear weapon, as the general said, than they were when we struck the deal, the JCPOA, that the Obama administration struck in 2015, because they have this enriched uranium, much of which they gained after President Trump in his first term tore up the JCPOA.
What you just heard from two of the most respected voices in American foreign policy and military strategy isn't pessimism. It isn't partisanship. It's something far more uncomfortable than either of those things. It's an honest accounting of what this war actually cost and what it actually produced. Let's recap what we know tonight. The United States and Iran have reached a tentative framework. The Strait of Hormuz, which was open before this war began, is expected to reopen. A ceasefire will be extended for 60 days, and then both sides will sit down to discuss Iran's nuclear program, the same nuclear program that has been the subject of American diplomacy for decades, long before a single bomb was dropped in this conflict. 13 Americans are dead. Thousands of Iranians are dead, including children. Gas prices spiked across America for months. Global energy markets were thrown into chaos. And tonight, as the Dow hits record highs on ceasefire news, the question that deserves to be asked quietly and seriously is this: what exactly was worth all of that? Not what was promised, what was delivered. There is no regime change. The regime that exists today in Tehran is younger, harder, and more radicalized than the one this war was supposedly meant to pressure. Iran's nuclear stockpile wasn't eliminated. According to the general you just heard from, a 4-star commander with decades of real experience, those 10 tons of highly enriched uranium now sit in a position where Iran could potentially build a dozen nuclear weapons within 5 years. That's not a fringe assessment. That's the considered judgment of someone who has spent a career understanding exactly these situations. And here's the part that doesn't make headlines but should. The democracy movement inside Iran, the one that was growing, that was fragile but real, that represented the possibility of change from within, has been reset. The people who might have been part of that movement are now living under a government that has every reason to tighten its grip and no reason to loosen it. So here are the 2 questions worth sitting with as you think about all of this tonight. If the goal of this war was to make America and its allies safer, and the result is a more radicalized Iranian regime with an intact nuclear program and a deeper distrust of the United States, were we actually made safer? And if the deal we arrive at 60 days from now looks substantially similar to the deal that existed before this war started, what does that say about the decision to start it? This moment does carry real good news. Escalation is receding. Oil prices are falling. People who were worried about a longer, wider war can breathe a little easier tonight. Those things are real and they matter. But good news and honest accounting are not mutually exclusive. A ceasefire is a relief. It is not a vindication, and the difference between those 2 things is exactly what the next 60 days of negotiations will begin to reveal. The story of this war isn't finished tonight. It's entering a new chapter, one where the promises made at the beginning will either be quietly rewritten or quietly forgotten, while the costs paid to get here remain permanent. If you found this report insightful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real, fact-based news commentary. This is the kind of coverage that only reaches people when you help it travel. We'll be here, following every development as this story continues to unfold.